I mean, I think one of the things that's been wrong in the U.S. is we have a bad habit while we're bankrupt, funding both sides of wars that should have been avoided in the first place.
And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them.
Listen, I'm gonna let y'all know this right now. I will be a little upset with Tucker if he goes super hard on Vivek, asking him super tough questions, and knowing good and well that he did not do the same for Trump. So let's go.
No decent person can watch the video of young people being at a music festival in southern Israel without feeling horrified. It's awful. And there's no excusing it.
Static clean.
No matter what you think of Israel's policies in Gaza, you are not allowed to shoot people at music festivals. That's a crime. Israel has a right to respond to that crime and to defend itself. No one seriously contests that. The question for American policymakers, however, is what do we do next? How do we represent the interests of the United States in this chaotic moment? That's not a selfish question. It's the whole point of making policy for a country, to improve and protect that country. If you serve in the U.S. Congress or in the executive branch of government, you have a moral duty to think this way. It's your job. You serve the United States and its population. You have no moral authority except to the extent that you represent your fellow Americans. That's our system. It used to be obvious, but it's worth remembering now because the conflict between Israel and Hamas could escalate into a war between Iran and its allies and the West. Once a war like that starts, you could easily imagine the use of nuclear weapons and all that entails. Millions dead, the collapse of the global economy. At the very least, you could see an unprecedented energy crisis here. Already gas in one Bay Area service station hit $7.29 a gallon over the weekend. If that trend worsens and persists, the United States, which is already technically speaking bankrupt, would plunge into depression. And no, it would not be like the 1930s. Close to 10 million people have come here over the last 3 years from the poorest places in the world. The overwhelming majority of them are on some form of federal subsidies. You wonder how that's going to work out when the U.S. government runs out of money. So there's a lot at stake in how we encourage Israel to respond to the horrifying Hamas attack. Wisdom and long-term thinking are essential, but you will not be surprised to learn that is not what we are getting. Watch this person, for example, who happens to be the media's pick for president of the United States.
This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America because they hate us just as much. And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. You know Iran's behind it.
Okay, Miss Mortal Kombat.
Jeez.
I'm going to say this to Netanyahu. Finish them. I don't see. Some of you don't know about that. That's Mortal Kombat. I think that's Mortal Kombat. What was that Street Fighter? It's one. I don't know which one it is, but it's one of them.
Finish them. They should have hell to pay for what they've just done.
This was an attack on America, she says. But in fact, it was not. And for that reason, we must, quote, finish Iran, a nation of nearly 90 million people. What are we watching here? This is not sober leadership. She's a child, and this is the tantrum of a child. Ignorant, cocksure, bloodthirsty. Yet no one in Washington scolded her for it. In fact, they aped her hysteria. Here's fellow neocon.
He giving Nikki Haley the business. Whoa! Did he really check her like that? Was a chin check. Bow, bow. He two-pieced her. He gave her a two-piece and a biscuit just now. Sheesh.
And Lindsey Graham just spelling it out and calling for the bombing of Iran.
So I've been on the phone all day to the Mideast, and I've told our allies and people with connections to Iran, what I would do, I would tell Iran that if Hezbollah attacks Israel, we're going to come after you, the Iranians, and have a coordinated effort between the United States and Israel to put Iran out of the oil business by destroying their refineries. There are 4 major refineries in Iran. They're fixed targets. If Hezbollah attacks Israel, I would make Iran pay a heavy price.
What exactly would happen to the United States if we declared war on Iran and started blowing up their infrastructure? Lindsey Graham has no clue what would happen. He hasn't thought it through. He's almost 70 years old and he has no children. he doesn't care. But neither, amazingly, do most of his colleagues in Washington. They're as reckless as he is. Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw took to social media to call for what he described as a war to end all wars, as if there is such a thing. But of course, there isn't such a thing. Wars beget more war. The bigger the conflict, the uglier and longer lasting the consequences. See World War I for details. These are not complex observations, but they seem lost on our leadership class. Alone among candidates running for the Republican nomination for president, Vivek Ramaswamy dared to suggest that actually going to war with Iran might not be in America's national interest. And for saying that, Mike Pence immediately denounced him as gutless and unpatriotic or something. But we thought it might be worth hearing more. Vivek Ramaswamy joins us now.
Tucker, not for nothing, that was a damn good intro. It seemed like Fox News, the good old days. How the hell would I know? Because I didn't even used to watch Fox News, but I do think that was an amazing intro. It brought us up to the reason why Vivek is there in the first place, which is dope. Phenomenal job. Continue.
Vivek, thanks so much for coming on. So if I'm reading this correctly, you suggested, while offering what seemed like real sympathy to the Israeli people, and to the many murdered there 2 days ago, you noted that maybe it's not in America's best long-term interest to declare war on Iran. Is that what you said?
I actually said this long before this crisis when people were thinking clear-headedly. And I just want to say a couple of things that are obvious but important, Tucker. I mean, what happened against Israel? You said it, I believe it. It is barbaric, it is medieval, it is wrong, and Israel as a nation absolutely has the right to self-defense, to its own national existence. And I think they should have our moral and diplomatic support as an ally. But there's one element of this that nobody's talking about. What the hell went wrong with U.S. and Israeli intelligence and the Israeli defense that allowed this to happen? Everybody seems to be punting that as a question for later. I think it's a question for now. If you're Israel, I mean, look, I think that Nikki Haley, I disagree with you a little bit there. I don't think she's a child. I think that she is somebody who is, like many politicians, in a position to get wealthier from war. Look at the military contracting business and otherwise. But put that to one side. The message that I would send would be very different. Get to the bottom of what allowed this gaping hole of intelligence and defense to even happen before feeding that same beast. If a doctor told you his job was to keep you from getting cancer and then you got that cancer, don't go trust that same doctor to remove your tumor. They don't let airplanes when they crash. The pilots or the people who crash the airplane, that airliner is not the one who reviews the black box. And so I think those answers have to come now. That's not a question for later. And I think one of the learnings for the U.S., I think there's a lot of learnings for the U.S., Tucker, but one of the learnings is if that establishment can get it wrong in Israel from a U.S. perspective, that could happen right here at home. And if anything, as an ally, one of the things that we need to wake up to is that we're vulnerable here in the United States to the same. And so we can do some things to prevent that, secure our border, stop funding. I mean, I think one of the things that's been wrong in the U.S. is we have a bad habit while we're bankrupt, funding both sides of wars that should have been avoided in the first place. Look at the money that's indirectly found its way to Hamas, the $6 billion paid to Iran in the recent ransom. That was a disaster. Yet we're effectively now funding both sides of a war that we shouldn't have been in the first place in places like Ukraine even. Think about how we hampered oil production in the United States and then now has funding, U.S. funding going to Ukraine in fighting back against Russia. It's a bad habit in the United States, and we need leaders here who will look after what advances American interests. And I find what Dan Crenshaw said to be cringeworthy. It is shameful. World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars, that got us to World War II. That can't be the way that we run foreign policy. The job of American leaders is to advance American interests, and I think we support Israeli leaders asking what advances and defends Israel as we should, morally and diplomatically, but leaders here need to look after American interests first.
This brother is very well spoken. It seems that he have all the information and possibly all the correct answers at the time. Something like a student that knows exactly. He has his pulse. He has his finger on the pulse of conservatism, and he says what needs to be said in order to continue to push the needle forward for him to attain the position that he wants to attain. if that makes sense. All right.
The conversation can't be limited to right and wrong. I mean, I don't think there's anyone defending the murder of concert goers in the Negev 2 days ago is, disqualified from.
Bold 30 defends it. Bold 30 think that the Hamas had a right to attack the concert goers. He's saying that wait, we need to hear them out. We need to hear their side first. Okay, let's hear their side. Okay, all right. Okay, let's ask them why they did it. Hamas, do you mind telling us why you did that? Hold on, we need to hear that side first. Bold 30 did that.
Being taken seriously. Yeah. Of course, that's wrong. But it doesn't seem like any American policymaker is even willing to entertain other questions like what's in America's best interest? What effect will this have on the global economy, on our economy, on energy prices? These are not small things. They should not be dismissed, but
they shouldn't, because it affects all of us, everyone in the world.
They are dismissed out of hand, and you're some sort of quizzling if you even raise the question. Why is that? It seems crazy to me.
Well, look, I mean, if you want to ask the question of right and wrong, then open that Pandora's box. I don't favor doing this, but look at what's happening with Azerbaijan and Armenia. You don't really hear much about that now.
At all. That's another thing. We're doing all of this talking about what's happening in Israel and in Palestine, but nobody's talking about Azerbaijan. Nobody's talking about that. And many people are being killed as we speak. And nobody cares about that. The Armenians are freaking, oh man, I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going, nope. Nope. Because I don't know how this will come off, how this will play on social media after it's posted. But there's a few wars going on right now that don't nobody give a good god daggone about. We cared and we care about all of these people who are going through their situations, but some aren't even being spoken of. And Azerbaijan is one of them that's not been spoken of a whole lot.
Why? Because Azerbaijan's lobby is about as effective as Ukraine's is in Washington, D.C. So this selective moral outrage, I do think is a problem.
May I ask you to pause for just one moment there and just unpack that for viewers who are not aware of what you're referring to. Armenia, Azerbaijan, what is happening?
See, Tucker Carlson didn't even know. He said Armenia, Azerbaijan, what's happening? No, let me take that back. I'm certain that Tucker Carlson knows what's happening, but it's not big enough of a topic right now for him to discuss on his platform. And you're not going to catch Tucker Carlson off guard. So obviously when he asked about that, he see that that's more on Vivek Ramaswamy's radar than it is his. So he did the proper thing by acknowledging what he said, but in the form of a question so that he could respond in a manner that schools him in a way, brings him up to date, and now he can continue with the conversation with questions and comments to make it seem like, hey, I knew about it. We just didn't talk a whole lot about it because it wasn't that big of a deal. But Vivek Ramaswamy is about to break down this whole thing in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, so, I mean, what's happening is an atrocity. I mean, you have people who are Armenians, largely Christians, six-figure numbers, 120,000, being driven back to their country from a region that has long been a place they have called home. A lot of atrocities that aren't even yet coming to light in Western media. But Azerbaijan has a lobby, a powerful lobby in Washington, D.C. And I think a big part of what's wrong in the United States today, Tucker, and I don't mean to toot my own horn, but it's why I'm coming in as an outsider to this nonsense, is you have a system that is bought and paid for, both for the people who run on the Democratic ticket, people who run on the Republican ticket, and people who make those decisions in Washington, D.C. that are effectively managed by, in this case, the Azerbaijan lobby that has a lid on discussing this conflict, which, as you pointed out, most Americans haven't heard of. But you'll hear endlessly about Russia's incursion on Ukraine and having to stand on the right side. That's a separate point where I reject that Ukraine is inherently good anyway. But even if it were, a selective moral outrage in that case, but not another one in just a neighboring area that interfaces with Russia as well. So open that Pandora's box around the world. I mean, look at much of Africa.
Now, before he gets into Africa, now it is happening all over the world. That's the thing too. It's happening all over the world, fam. That's what it's doing. But here's the thing. About a month ago, I did a video with a young lady by the name of Anais. Do y'all remember? Young lady, a whole lot of curly hair, her hair is just filled with curly hair. Just a whole bunch of curly hair. Lovely young lady. Her and her dad, I interviewed them both, and they are both Armenian, all right? And it affects them directly like completely just the whole thing just they don't understand why they aren't getting the airplay that a lot of these other places are receiving so that they can receive the same support from this country that these other places are receiving. And it makes no sense to them. If they're from there, they got family there, friends there, and that's still part of their home. Like when they came here, they can still go back and visit friends, still go back and visit family, retire there one day once they've been able to build a life for themselves here in America, make some great relationships, and they might want to return back to Armenia, Azerbaijan, whenever they're done, whenever they're just ready to cool out and just say, yo, we back, we've made some success for ourselves, our family are going to live good back here, everything. I don't know what the case may be. They just don't know why they're not receiving the same airplay.